Dave Dudajek, Pam Sperbeck, Frank Tomaino, and Joe Kelly.
My name is Dave Dudajek, or Dudajek as you prefer. That's what everybody calls me. I'm a New York Mills native and a graduate of the high school there, as well as a 1972 graduate of Utica College, where I majored in English. And I began work. I graduated 1 week from UC and went to work the next week at the Rome Daily Sentinel, where I spent the next 7 years as a reporter, Associated Press wire editor, and I also spent 2 years as editor of the Clinton Courier, which was owned by the Sentinel at the time. And in 1979, I became a copy editor at the Observer-Dispatch, and I worked there for the next 40 years as an assistant news editor, feature writer, columnist, and I spent the last 20 years there as opinion page editor. And I retired in May 2020 at the age of 50. Imagine that? Just kidding. I enjoy running. I've run 36 Boilermakers, and I'm on the committee, and I play the trumpet, and I've been with many area bands and currently play with the MVCC Community Concert Band. I've been married 51 years to my wife Jan, a retired English teacher who kept close watch on me, and we have 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren that keep us pretty busy, busier than I was actually when I worked. Next.
Hi, I am Pam Sperbeck. I started at the OD in 1989 as, actually I started in the HR department, and then Tony Vella, managing editor, the OD at the time, came down and said, Sperbeck, come up to the newsroom. So I went up to the newsroom, was newsroom administrator, and then from there I kind of grew into all sorts of different roles. I was the community editor, I was the accent editor, I was the special sections editor, and then most recently in January of last year, 2022, I left the OD after 33 years and went to the Daily Sentinel. And there I was special sections editor. I was helping with all their special sections, the Boonville Herald, also the daily paper, and now I am the managing editor. So I am now in charge of the entire newsroom. So I know, scary. I live in New Hartford. I have 2 children, young men now who live in St. Louis, so I spend most of my vacation time traveling to and from St. Louis. Born and raised in the area. My mom's here, yeah, right there next to Pat. And that's about it. I enjoy playing pitch and pickleball, and that's about it. Thank you.
I see a lot of OD people here, so I got to be careful what I say. I can't exaggerate anything. My name is Frank Tomaino. I was born in a log cabin on Mary Street a long time ago. I grew up in East Utica. I graduated from Proctor in 1949. When the Korean War started, 1950, I enlisted in the Air Force. And I served for 4 years. And when I got out, I had the GI Bill coming. So I started in 1957 at Utica College, majored in English, and graduated in '61. We were the last class to graduate from Utica College from Oneida Square. While I was at Utica College, I got a job at the OD as a sports stringer. And my first byline was a 1958 the Canastota Holland Patton football game. I think Holland Patton won. And I got $3 for it, by the way. We were paying $3 for a game. But then I covered Utica College basketball, high school football. When I graduated in 1962, I started full-time at the OD as a police reporter. And I was a police reporter for almost 3 years when I got a scholarship to go to Colgate in their teacher intern program. And as part of the program, I taught high school English at Canastota High, 1964 and 1965, freshman and sophomore English. Came back to the OD in 65 as a general assignment reporter. I was promoted to assistant city editor, and in 1968 I became city editor and Sunday city editor until I believe I retired in 1991. In 1968 I also started a column called Frankly Speaking in the OD, and 75% of the time it was about local history, which I loved. And I ran that column ran until 1986, when the morning paper, the Daily Press, merged with the afternoon OD and formed the morning OD. And I began a column called This Week in History. When I retired in 91, the OD asked me to continue the column, which I've done for 32 years, and I still write the darn thing. So, that's it. Thank you very much.
Joe Kelly. Most of the things I've done in my life, including my career, I've done ass backwards. My original career was in electronics. That's what I was trained in, electronics. And worked up at Griffiths. And then went from Griffiths to General Electric. Worked at 901 Broad Street for many years on the F-111 project. The F-111 was a fighter jet, and the radar was designed and built in Utica. And it was a fabulous airplane, and it had this terrain following radar. And so the pilots could sit in that airplane and be 100 feet off the ground, and that going up and down hills, incredible thing. Then they had a strike at GE, and I forget what the dates were on these things, but they had a strike on GE, and I was out on strike, and with everybody else. And there was a mayoral election in Utica that year. Mike Caruso was running against Dicasaro, and I didn't really care who won, but we had to go 4 hours to walk the picket line to get your strike benefits, and then the rest of the time was yours for the day. And most of the guys that I worked with, there was a beer joint around the corner, and went up there and drank beer and played cards, and I had nothing against either of those things, but doing it at 11 o'clock in the morning seemed a little early in the day. So I called Mike Caruso, because I figured the incumbent Dicasaro, nice gentleman, but I figured he had all the volunteers he needed. I called Mike Caruso and said, do you need anybody to stuff envelopes and put stamps on envelopes? And he said, I do, come on down. I went down, and that's what I did. But I got to get a flavor for politics, which has always interested me. And then one day, the guy that handled all his important PR, press releases, speeches, said, can anybody here write a news release? And the word I heard was can. And nobody raised their hand. So I raised my hand. I said, yeah, I can do that. And so he said, well, take these things home tonight and bring back a news release based on that, which I did. Stopping first at the Utica Public Library and getting a book, and I can remember the name of this book to this day, How to Write a News Release. And I took that book home, and it took me about 8 hours to write the damn thing, which today I could probably do in 10 minutes. So he said, okay, good, from now on you'll write the unimportant news releases and I'll write the important ones. And then one day, he walked into the campaign headquarters, which was on the west side of Genesee Street, right above the busy corner. Can anybody here write a speech? Once again, I heard the word Ken, and nobody raised their hand. I went back up to the library, got another book about how to write speeches. And by the time the campaign was over, that's what I was doing, writing the unimportant speeches and the unimportant news releases. This was in 1972, I believe. And, you know, there was no polling going on. Today, you know who won before election night's over. Not then. Anyway, Mike Caruso won the election, much to everybody's surprise, including his. And there was a look on his face that night, what do I do now, you know? Anyway, the strike at GE ended. I went back to GE, very happy for the experience. Mike Caruso went to City Hall as mayor. After 3 months, there was a tremendous layoff at GE nationwide. And I was one of the people that got laid off. And I got a call from Mike Caruso, the now mayor, and he said, how'd you like to come to work at City Hall doing what you're doing for me and answering my mail, things like that. And I said, well, I want to go back to GE. And he said, well, come do it until you get called back. And I did. And after 6 months or so, they called me back, and I said, I don't think I'm going back. And I stayed at City Hall, then worked there for a couple of years. Tough place to work, City Hall. Then I got a call from State Senator Jim Donovan asking if I'd like to go to work for him. News releases, constituent mail, speeches, helping write legislation. I figured there had to be a book at the library that talked about that. Went to work for Senator Donovan, even a harder place to work than City Hall. He was a workaholic. But you know, all this time I was exposed to journalists and newspapers, and I thought that's where I really want to go. And so I went. This is getting longer than 2 minutes, I know, I'm sorry. I'm down this trail now, I got to keep going. And so I went down, I applied. Gil Smith, one of the best journalists I've ever known. And there's some good ones in this room today, but Gil I thought was the best, one of the best. I went down, I applied, he said, he opened up his drawer, desk drawer. Never let me see what was in it, but he opened it up. He said, this is filled with applications from people better qualified, better educated than you. How do you expect me to hire you? And he slammed the door. And I said, well, I guess I don't expect you to do that. And so I was excused. 6 months later, there was another opening at DOD. Went back, same deal, opened the drawer, slammed the drawer. So I'd had it there. And then I get a call from Ed Byrne, and I think Ed Byrne is a name that many of the people here are familiar with. Ed Byrne was a great political writer, worked for the DOD for a long time. Fastest writer I've ever seen. Dictates stories like nothing. And Ed called me, he said, there's an opening at DOD, why don't you go apply? I said, I'm not going to apply, I've already done it twice, and I got the drawer routine. He said, no, go down. He said, I'm going to call Gil Smith, you go down there. I went down there, I walked in. This time I didn't get the drawer. This time Gil said to me, I owe Ed Byrne a favor, a big favor. And I'm going to hire you, and that's the favor to Ed Byrne. And I thought, God, he must really owe Ed big time. On one condition, and the condition is, after 90 days, if you don't work out, and I'm sure you're not going to work out, and this is just about verbatim quotes that I'm giving you here. After 90 days, when I tell you to leave, you leave. I don't want any crying. I don't want any complaining. I just want you to go. I said, okay. And that 90 days turned into 20 years. So, and then from there, I left after 20 years, bought the Boonville Herald, operated that for 20 years. And because I was too young and too poor not to do anything in life. So I bought the Herald, and very fortunate that the Herald was purchased by the Sentinel a few years ago. I didn't want to just sell the paper. A community newspaper is very important, and I wanted to go to the right people because I was concerned about my people and I was concerned about the community. And so thank God it went to the Sentinel, and now it's operating even stronger than ever. I still write a column for the Herald and for the Sentinel. Try to be a little bit active down here at the History Center. And I'm sorry I went way over there, Rebecca.
You're fine.
All right.
This is a very good lead into our next question. So you're all newspaper veterans with decades of experience, and you've all kind of touched upon this, but what were your earliest days like, and how has your profession changed?
Well, I don't know where to begin, where the industry's changed. I think most of us started here with, typewriters and that type of thing, but just a few things. When I started in the 1950s and then early 1960s, one thing, we all had to wear shirt and ties. That was the one thing. And to me, the newsrooms even smelled and sounded different. Everybody smoked, it seemed. And there must have been like 50 in the newsroom, everybody was smoking. And of course, typewriters make more noise than computers. Phones were ringing, it was just a busy place. But I remember when I was city editor, we hired a reporter from New York City, real hotshot, good reporter. I'll give you Harvey Schwartz, good reporter. And again, we had a policy, the men had to wear shirts and ties. And he came the first day to work, no tie. I'm city editor, and my managing editor, Dill Smith, called me and said, take him in the conference room, tell him he's got to wear a tie or he goes back to New York City. You can imagine it. So I took him in the conference room. He couldn't believe me. He said, you're going to fire me if I don't wear a tie? But that was the case. And he lived in Clinton. He put on a tie. He wore the same tie. He was with us for about 5 years. He wore the same tie. But like I say, there are so many. You could go on and on how the industry has changed. Oh, I'm sure. Go.
I think the thing that changed the most for me was when I started. It was, as Frank described, manual typewriters. I had an Underwood typewriter, teletype machines going in the corner, reporters talking loud, editors talking loud. It was my wife who's here today, asked me once, I was writing a column, she said, if I have the TV on, is that going to bother you? I said, no, it's almost quiet for me from what I'm used to. The sound in the newsroom was very loud. And a cloud of smoke hung under the ceiling, because everybody smoked, including yours truly. I had a fire in my ashtray one day, I remember that. And it was a very noisy place. It was a very unhealthy place. But it felt like home to me for a long time. And then we gradually moved on to electric typewriters and then computers. And I remember when they stopped smoking in the building, Wendy Barrett was the instigator behind that. She was a young lady, young reporter, and she said, I don't think I should have to work in this kind of an atmosphere. I mean, you literally could see the smoke hanging under the ceiling because there was no ventilation, no window. And so she convinced the powers that be that to stop smoking in the newsroom. You could only smoke downstairs in the lunchroom. And then she got it out of there, and you couldn't smoke in the building anymore, thank God. And
But Joe, at one time, you could only smoke in Tony Bella's office.
well, right, yeah.
And so was everybody smoking in one office.
Yeah. That's a good point. Tony Bella, another great journalist. He was a managing editor for many years. Great reporter before that. And Tony always had an unfiltered Pall Mall cigarette going, always. And, that was Tony.
Yeah.
So.
The walls were
Just
yellow.
once. Can I just 1 second, I just thought of something else. You know, when I first started too, at the OD, you know, really we had no competition. There were no talk shows on radio or television. You had WKTV had no reporters. I mean, I covered many stories, big stories, where there was never a reporter from television, a cameraman. I mean, they've got reporters now, good ones, but this is years ago. We had no competition from really anyone, radio, nothing. So things have changed. Many times as city editor, I would sit on a story. If my police reporter came and said, well, you know, in another month, they're going to make Bleecker Street one way. Well, let's say it was a day where I had a lot of stories. Well, I would sit on that story knowing no one else was going to get it. I was not going to lose the story to television or a radio talk show or, you know, like Joe's show on Sunday. So that was, to me, a big change. We had very little competition in the early days.
Yeah, we can't do that anymore. I like to sit on stories. The photo department, I see Nancy Ford is here, and when I first started, they were processing their own film. We had a photo lab back there, lots and lots of chemicals, and now, touch of a button, and you get a photo. The newspaper was loaded with classified ads, garage sales, personals. Remember the personals? Now you just swipe left or right, and back then it was looking for. And reporters actually had face-to-face interactions with their sources. And nowadays it's texting, emailing, Facebook messaging. So yeah, it's changed a lot.
That's a good segue into when I first started at the Rome Sentinel. I started as a general assignment reporter, covered just about anything I was told to cover. And but then I eventually covered the City Hall beat under the administration of Bill Valentine. I don't know how many people remember him, but he was a great mayor, and he was there for many years. And you'd go to City Hall in the morning, and you'd go through all the departments. You'd go to zoning, you'd go to planning, you'd go to all the different departments in City Hall, and end up at the mayor's office. And then you'd go back, and we were a PM paper, and you get back maybe by 11 o'clock in the morning and write 3 or 4 or 5 stories by a 12:30 deadline. And so you kept busy. And as Pam said, you came face to face with all your sources, and you couldn't say you just heard it, because when you talked to your sources, and you went back and you wrote the story. So it was a busy time, and you covered common council meetings, and if you covered the city beat, you had to cover the common council, you covered the planning board, you covered the zoning board, and everything was covered by a reporter. And my friend sitting out there, Pat Corbett, worked for the Daily Press at the time, and I worked for the Sentinel. We sat next to each other at many zoning and planning board meetings and common council meetings, and still have some good stories about those times. Don't we, Pat?
You know, another big change, and there's pros and cons to this, and I see both sides of this, is email. I had a reporter call me not too long ago and had some questions. It was an out-of-town publication, and he said, "Would you like me to email you the questions?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be good." And what's good is, if you're not sure of the answers, the email coming to you gives you time. So I was able to sit back, think about the answers to those questions, and then I typed out my answers to him, and that's what appeared in his publication. But it gave me time to think, it gave me time. Now, in the old days, that wouldn't happen. A reporter would call you. He or she was on dead. They didn't want you to even think. They just wanted you to give them the answer. The good part about it is it's a thoughtful response. The bad part about it is sometimes when you let people think, they can be a little devious, you know. I think of some of the politicians that I've interviewed over the years, and I'm glad I didn't give them time to think about it, you know. If somebody said to me, sometimes they say, well, can I call you back? I just want to, and they would call me back and be fine. But there was no email kind of thing. And so I don't know, I'm a little betwixt and between about how I feel about email and all that. But more and more journalists are going to email.
The changing technology, the one thing it did for newspapers especially, is this on? Yeah. Was it gave us a sense of immediacy more than in the past. In the past, when there was a breaking news story, we might have been, you talk about being the first one to get there, the first one to. The first thing you wanted to do was get it right, and being first was not always the best, because sometimes if you were first, you weren't always right. And you had verification. I could remember. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I could remember there was one time, and I'll try to say this without using names, but there was one source. It was an April Fool's joke, and somebody sent a news release around that Mayor Hanna, who I'm sure many of you recall, had resigned. Well, a lot of the news sources in the area jumped on it because it was a big story. Mayor Hanna resigned, and we couldn't, frankly, at the OD, we couldn't confirm it. He was out of town, and we couldn't reach him, and we looked kind of silly because we were the only news source in town that didn't have the story, which turned out to be pretty good because it wasn't true. And that's why it's so important to verify things. But back to the immediacy, we couldn't beat TV on a story that was developing. If a downtown building blew up, TV was there, and they had it on camera, and we could have a photographer there, we could have a reporter there, or we could have 10 reporters there. But we couldn't get that story out to the public until the next day's paper, unless we put out an extra, which we did on several occasions. But even then, you're not going to beat the electronic media in something like that. With the internet, that changed the whole dynamic of how things worked. We were able to get it up on the website 2 minutes after it happened, and that was a major change for the way things worked. You have something to say?
We can now beat TV. So now we write first for online, and then you get something online, and sometimes it's just check back for more information, but you can get that breaking news right online. For instance, Sunday, Wynn Hospital moving all their patients in. We had a reporter work from first patient to the last patient, and we reported throughout the day what was happening at Wynn Hospital. Without technology, we wouldn't have had that story until the next day. So yeah, we write first for online, second for print. So it's definitely different these days.
I used to like election night.
For the food, right?
Well, they put out a nice buffet, And so that was that. But there was this, there was a sense of excitement about election night. I don't know. I haven't been in the newsroom on election night in a long time, but back in those days, it was actually kind of fun to see how things were going to go, and you worked a little bit late, and you got the story in. So I thought that was good. But I've never seen, Frank, you've been around longer than anybody here. I've never seen them stop the presses.
No, for election?
Yeah, for anything. I've never seen the presses stop. Now, maybe you have. I've seen them slow down, not to get into the weeds here, but you can slow down the presses to get a story in or change a story, but I've never seen them stopped.
Now, the closest I've seen is the Kennedy assassination, 1963. It was a Friday, November 22nd, and at that time the OD had 4 editions. The first edition went to eastern Herkimer County, Little Falls and Herkimer. The second edition went to eastern Herkimer County, Mohawk, Ilion, Frankfort. And the first city edition was the third edition. Well, I'm in the newsroom that day, about 1:30 in the afternoon. The phone rings, and a woman on the phone said, "Do you have any information about the president being shot?" And I said, we had heard nothing. At that time, we had a wire room where you had machines popping out stories 24 hours a day, Associated Press, UPI, United Press International. We had a New York Times service, Gannett News Service. We even had a racing wire. And usually when you had a bulletin, a bell would ring. And no bell rang, so I went to the wire room and I didn't see anything about the president being shot. So I went back to the phone and I told the woman, somebody's joking around. I said, we have nothing on that. As soon as I hung up, the bell rang. And Kennedy had been shot. Well, by this time it was almost 2 o'clock, and the city edition was beginning to run. So in those days, we never said stop the press. It was, if you wanted to stop the press, you said must catch, stop the press. If you called downstairs and just said catch, like you said, they slowed down the press. So at that time, we were not sure if Kennedy had died or what. So Gil Smith, a great headline writer, by the way, wrote the headline, "JFK shot in Texas." And we slowed down the press. The press began to run with that headline. Then a little after 2 o'clock, we got word that he had died. And we shouted, "Must catch." We stopped the press, took the word shot out, and put slain, S-L-A-I-N, in JFK, slain in Texas. And then the presses went full blast. So that's the only time I can remember where we ever really, stopped the press. I'm probably forgetting 2 or 3 other times. So.
I'll tell you one. When the Pope, talking about people getting shot, when the Pope, this would have been Pope John Paul II, 1982, was shot in St. Peter's Square outside the Vatican. Monsignor Sewell, who was at Lady of Lords, was at the hotel, which is now the Delta Inn. I don't know, what is it called now?
The what?
Downtown hotel.
Sheraton?
Is that the Sheraton downtown here? Delta. Monsignor Sewell was giving a luncheon talk to the Jewish group, B'nai B'rith, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah.
And George Newman was on the desk, and I don't know why you weren't there, but George Newman was on the desk. He said, "Get up to the hotel, get some comments from Monsignor Sewell, who'd been to the Vatican more than once, had talked to the Pope, So it'd be a good story. You know, you try to localize as much as you can on these international stories. I raced up there. He was at the head table, and thank goodness he was at this end of the head table. So I was able to come down the aisle, knelt down there to talk to him. The Jewish people there probably, what the heck did this guy do that he's got to get absolution in the middle of our lunch? Anyway, I told Monsignor Sewell what happened. He gave me some great quotes. I raced back to the paper. This happened around, we found out at our time, I don't know, 11 o'clock or something. By the time I got back to the paper, it was around 11:30 in the morning, and George Newman said, write as much as you can in 15 minutes. Boy, I tell you, I'm not a fast writer to begin with, but 15 minutes, even for a fast writer, is not a lot of time to write a story. So it wasn't a hard story to write because of the content, because it had good content, but the hard part was 15 minutes. And I had just stopped smoking. And the thing I wanted the most right then was a cigarette. And Don Noor, rest his soul, he's long gone, sat across from me, and he had a cigarette going. And I thought, well, I'm going to go bum a cigarette. And I said, no, don't do that because you're going to lose 30 seconds there. That's only going to give you 14 and a half minutes. And then I thought, you've already wasted another 30 seconds thinking about it. So I had 14 minutes on that old Underwood typewriter, and I was going as fast as I could. And then they shouted, the city editor sat on the other side of the room from me and said, that's it. I just kept typing. They yelled over one more time, that's it. And I kept typing. Finally, Tony Vella comes out of his office with that Pall Mall cigarette going. He said, Joe, that's it. I said, okay. And I kept typing. Well, I got probably another 10, 12 graphs in just because I kept typing. Finally, Tony just took the paper right out of the typewriter and said, no, this is it. And so that was the toughest for me only because of time. Very difficult to write something like that. And there was a lot of fast writers at the OD. I was not one of them.
I think the toughest story I ever had to write was an interview that I did with a gentleman by the name of, I'm sure many of you know his name, Julian Noga. Julian was, he had the longest running Polish radio station or radio program in the country. And Julian ran a memorial service up on Commercial Drive, up on Route 5, Southern Turnpike. And I went to interview him one time because someone had told me that he had been in a concentration camp in World War II. So I went up and we got talking. And as he got further and further into the story, I just stopped taking notes because his story was so fascinating and intriguing. I couldn't listen to him with the emotion and take notes at the same time. And he told me this incredible story about how he had fallen in love with this Austrian woman, which was taboo for Polish people back in those days of the Nazi occupation. And he got caught. They beat him severely and told him, don't do that anymore. And he did. And they beat him again, and they eventually put him in a concentration camp in Flossenburg, where he learned how to cut. He made curbing. That's how he learned the trade that he ended up making a living at when he came here. But he told this incredible story about how they maintained their communication throughout his time in the concentration camp, and how when he got out, he got a bicycle and he rode all the way back. It was just a fascinating story. And he talked for, he told me how he befriended one of the guards there by giving him cigarettes. And one day, the guard came up to him and they told him that they were having some people come in, the Nazis were coming into the camp to just check things out. And this guard came up to him and told him, get back to your barracks and stay there. And he didn't know what he was doing, but he just did what he was told. And so he went back to the barracks and stayed there. And then he saw this entourage of Nazis pull up, got out of the big limousines, and this one guy got out and walked up and down the lines, and he started picking every other person, and he sent them all. They all went to Auschwitz, and he found out later that the guy who was doing the picking was Adolf Eichmann, and it was just such an intriguing story. And then the love story was all wound into it all, and it was. So I got back to the office with all this information, and I didn't know what to do, and. It was just so I just walked around the newsroom for about 10 or 15 minutes, and I finally started, once I started writing, I couldn't stop because it just flowed after that, because it was just such an incredible story. But that was probably the toughest story I ever had to write.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm trying to think. I really can't remember, a real tough story, but one thing I will say, it's tough to be a police reporter in the town you grew up in, because I remember one time I went to the police station, and a very close friend of mine had just been arrested for football pools. Remember the football pool for gambling? And I know this doesn't compare to anything like that, but sometimes it's tough to write, a story that your best friend has been arrested for gambling. So, but I really can't think of any, any story that I had a difficult time with. So.
Frank, tell the story about the OD editor that was arrested on the busy corner. And
oh no, I better not get into that.
Stick around, I'll tell you later.
There might be some censors in the audience.
Sarah Ann Wood. That was in 1990. Sarah Ann Wood. August 1993. I had never heard of Norwich Corners until Sarah Ann Wood. Sure, we heard about kidnappings and things like that, but I think our philosophy around here was, oh, that'll never happen here. Well, it happened here, and I'll never forget that. And it also changed the way, being a mom, how we all of a sudden wouldn't let our kids just wander around anymore. We had to know where they were at all times, because it happened here. And we're still writing about it. The Sentinel, we just did a story a few months ago in August, because it was the 30th anniversary. So it's something that I'll never forget. So.
Well, I was going to say the same thing. That's the one that impacted me the most. I kind of got dragged into that a little bit. I didn't want to cover the story. I was writing a column by then, and Tony Vella said to me, "You got to get on this. You got to start writing columns about it." And the reason I didn't want to was because everybody and their brother was writing about it. And I thought one more person pestering these people would be one more too many. But I went up there to Norwich Corners, and eventually it came to the point where I didn't even bother going into the OD that day. I went directly from my house up there, and I wrote every day about it. And then, of course, when the bike ride for missing children started from Washington Mills down to Washington, D.C., I was on that, and I got very involved with the family, and that was kind of a difficult situation too, because you get involved with people sometimes, and maybe you cross a line you shouldn't get so involved with them, but it was hard not to get involved with the Woods family, such a decent family, to have this tragedy happen to them. And Frances, Bob Wood's wife, a lovely lady, Bob called me one day at the OD and he said, would you come up and interview her? And everybody was trying to get an interview with Frances. She was a very quiet lady and didn't want to speak to the press. And I said, yes, I will, but I'm curious, Bob. You know, well, he said, he became very savvy to the media very quickly. And he said, everybody wants that first interview with her. So, I mean, CBS and, you know, national people. And he said, if you do it, she's comfortable with you. But if you do it, that'll take the pressure off. Then it won't be the first anymore. And so that's what we did there. And then we went together we walked up to Rochester, Bob Wood and I, because there was what was her name? Kaylee Polton, I believe, who had also been abducted, and her mother called Bob and said, would you come out here? And so talk about being savvy. So Bob called me at the OD, said, would you walk out there with me? And I did. And reporters all along the way would stop him and say, you know, can I interview you? And he'd say yes on 2 conditions. The one condition was you had to keep walking. He wouldn't stop. So if you were willing to walk, then he would let you talk to him as he walked. Remember, there was a Syracuse reporter, a young lady, she had high heels on. And Bob was a fast walker. And the second condition was you had to take a picture of him showing the 2 buttons that he wore on his shirt. A picture of Sarah and a picture of this Kaylee. And that was his way of getting that out to the public.
Well, I don't know if this answers the question, but something I wrote that really, changed my life. When I started the column, frankly speaking, it was not supposed to be a history column. But anyway, the first column I wrote, I had been reading the biography of Grover Cleveland, our president. And in the biography, I discovered that Grover Cleveland's parents not only lived in Holland-Patton, but were buried in Holland-Patton. I couldn't believe it. I never knew this. I never read anything about this. All the early history books about Utica never mentioned that. So I went up to Holland-Patton and was on a beautiful weekday morning. And I went to the cemetery there, and there was a guy mowing the lawn, and I said, Grover Cleveland's parents buried here? And he showed me back at the cemetery. They indeed were buried in Holland-Patton. And I did a little research. They lived in Holland-Patton. So I wrote the first column about that. And what a reaction I got. There was no email in those days, but I got phone calls, and it got me. Again, I had not planned to make the column a history column, but I think because of that, the majority of the columns for the next 100 years were about local history. So I think, that changed my career a little bit.
Frank had the best title for a column that I've ever seen. Frankly Speaking.
Yeah.
What a great name for it.
Yeah, Phil Spartano, who was a sports editor at the time at the OD, when I started a column, he come up with the title, Frankly Speaking.
Who brought the hat?
I
Patrick.
think Patrick made that for you.
Tell
Anyone want to wear it?
Yeah, tell people what the hat's about, Frank.
Well, I don't know. I know a lot of the printers, pressmen at the OD, when the OD had the press, used to make these hats and wear these hats, I guess, to keep the ink off their heads or something or other. But a lot of the printers, not printers, the pressmen, stereotypers and engravers used to wear these hats. I think, I was just thinking, I'm just thinking of one more thing, how things have changed. When I started at the OD, we had about 170 printers. They did everything, not only but including the ads. So how the industry has changed, linotype operators, but 170 printers. So that's one way
Yeah.
technology has really changed the newspaper business.
Well, Stephen Waters is here. He is the owner of Sentinel Media. Local owners are invested in the community, so they're not owned by, these big corporations. So we need more local ownership.
I have to speak to that point, because I started at the Sentinel in Rome, and I worked for two people, George and Shirley Waters, Steve's parents, and two finer people you could not find. They were so involved in their community, and they cared about the community, and that was reflected in the paper, and I learned a lot from them as far as trying to do my job with integrity and honor, because they were just remarkable people, and I knew I kept in touch with them basically throughout my life, and I always felt a little like I betrayed them by going to work for the competition, but they never gave me a sense that they felt that way. I would see Shirley at the Masonic home many years later, as my father-in-law was there, and Shirley would never fail to come over and talk to me and see me, and a big grin on her face, and she was just honored, in fact, by the History Center as in the Hall of Fame, which was justly deserved. And the other gentleman was Russ Fielding, who was also just honored by the NBCC in Rome, having a building named in his honor, and he was also a man of high integrity. And when you get a start like this, working for people like that, you get set on a path that you hope you can live up to the expectations of what they did and how they taught you, and that's important, and that's important in any job, really, to have good guidance from the very start.
Rebecca, you correct me or Frank if I'm wrong on this, but speaking of Shirley Waters, she was a living legend, and I remember when she was inducted.
She was our first living legend.
First? Yeah. And now she's in the History Hall of Fame.
I can't speak for the OD. I haven't worked there in 30 years. I do still write the column. But Gannett merged with Gatehouse, and they own the OD. And I better not.
That's all
I better shut up. I mean, I got to admit I'm disappointed, to what's happened with the OD. But that's what are you going to do? And thank God I get the Rome paper and a lot of good local news, a lot of Utica news in there. Thank God.
It's not the Rome paper. It's the Daily Sentinel. We have an office in Utica too, so.
I want to read something that I dug up in preparing for this a little bit, and it was a column that Leonard Pitts wrote in 2020, and he wrote that an analysis found that while people still want news, few are willing to pay for it. Quoted a study from the Reuters Institute at the University of Oxford that said that only 8% of Americans have an ongoing online news subscription. For comparison, 16% pay for music, and 23% pay for video. This is probably higher now. So Pitt suggests that you support local journalism. Quote, value it as much as you do Spotify and Netflix. Value it enough to pay for it. Especially now as advertising revenue shrinks in this collapsing economy, and as the industry that is already stressed faces new cutbacks, furloughs, and layoffs. What's happening, Pitt says, makes me anxious, not simply for my profession, but for my country. Because where power is not held to account, there can be no democracy. Only authority, only tyranny. I always like that song.
I hate to be a pessimist, but I think print media is on the way out. Magazines, newspapers. I think as time goes by, the younger people, they go online. And I remember not that many years ago how many magazines there were. I think Time magazine, was about 10 pages. The Sports Illustrated, I think it's a monthly now, so it's the same with newspapers. I can't think of, maybe Rome, I can't think of any newspaper where circulation is really going higher. Probably Rome now with, coming in Utica. So I think the print media is in trouble. I think most publishers don't want to fool around with barrels of ink and big rolls of paper anymore. Everything is electronic. And I think when the next couple of generations go, I think the print media is going to go with it. I hope I'm wrong.
Newspapers are finding other ways. I was up at the Sentinel's new digs up at Griffiths, and they do a podcast up there now. They're getting into newspapers, are getting into other areas, modern technology, and I think that maybe someday, I think you're right, but I think the platform they deliver the news in might not be something you can hold in your hand, which I enjoy, and which I think probably most of the people in this room enjoy. Well, that's going to come to an end someday, but there's going to be newspapers. I mean, not the printed newspaper, but they're going to be delivering the news. You're going to have a way to get the news. And so it's just, I think it's a matter of adapting to that technology. I'm not going to be around for it, so I don't have to worry about it, but they will, people who run newspapers are smart people. They're going to find ways to get that news out to people. Now, the platform they use might be something foreign to us, but it's going to go there.
Right. I think print media, an actual newspaper, I think we still have quite a few years left in us. It is getting harder and harder to find a place to print it because the printing presses are actually closing down. But I think there'll always be a newspaper. I think there always has to be a newspaper to hold people accountable, hold the government accountable. And the Sentinel subscriptions, I mean, we are one of the very few newspapers that our circulation is increasing. So I think we have quite a few years, I think we do have quite a few years left, and then after that, it's going to be here. We're going to get it on our phones, and it's not a bad thing. It's just different.
Yeah, you got to be adaptable to it. But one of the things that, and I mean, Steve could talk to this better than anybody here, but I think newspapers have lost their way in many instances. For example, one of the things that I read in the Sentinel is the police blotter. Now, I'm nosy, and I enjoy reading that kind of stuff. I enjoy reading stuff from village boards and town boards, and that's what a lot of newspapers have gone away from, of what people are interested in. I just think they lost track of what that was. People wanted. I'll tell you a 30-second story here. When I was a reporter, and I think this makes the point, Frank was on the desk that day. He said he could hear all the fire engines being sent up to the old Oneida National Bank. He said, Joe, get in the car and go up there and find out what's going on. I get up there. And there were a lot of fire engines up there, and I talked to a firefighter. He said, nope, nothing's going on. He said, false alarm. I said, okay. I go back to the OD. I got my feet up on the desk reading the paper, smoking a cigarette. Frank said, what happened? I said, it's a false alarm. And I go back to my cigarette and my newspaper. He said, well, give me 2 or 3 graphs. I said, Frank, it's a false alarm. He said, I know. But how many people were driving up and down Genesee Street, saw all those fire trucks, and are home tonight wanting to know what happened? Well, tell them what happened. Tell them it was a false alarm. And I think, you know, in newspapers we've kind of lost that. You know, I was reading, what paper was I reading the other day? And it just was all national news. Well, you know, I'm interested in national news too, but I want to know what's going on in my community. And that's where I think a lot of newspapers around this country lost their way. They forgot that people want to read about what's going on in their hometown.
If we don't support local journalism, then you're not going to have the information that you need to be part of your community. And there's a lot of good people in this community. If you read comments on ends of some stories, they allow comments, and you get these buffoons writing these ridiculous comments on stories, and they're the same old people, and there's probably 3 people using different names. But that's not our community. That's not our community talk. Our community is filled with incredible people doing incredible things. And I wrote columns over the years of just average people who really weren't so average. And you're not going to find this. You're not going to find out about these people any other way other than through your local newspaper.
I just want to say that I am proud to still be able to work in this industry, to work for a local newspaper with a local owner, with local reporters who still care about the community. And hopefully that will continue for many, many more years with everyone's support.
And as they're talking, I'm sitting back thinking, what am I going to say? I guess I hear many people complain about the bias now in the news media, especially the New York Times, the cable news services, not so much the local newspapers. But as I love history, and I'm doing a little research, from the beginning of the United States, there's been bias in the newspapers. Right at the beginning, George Washington, who was a member of the Federalist Party, and Thomas Jefferson, who was a member of the Democrat-Republican Party. And these parties had newspapers. And you read some of the Republican Democrat papers criticizing George Washington. I wrote a few things down preparing for this. They called they accused him of stealing from the Treasury, that he was an inept general, and he was a hypocrite because he did not support the French Revolution. America was neutral. And reading old newspapers, even in Utica, in the late 19th century, the Utica Observer was an arm of the Democratic Party. The Utica Morning Herald was an arm of the Republican Party. So the Utica Observer never had nice things to say about that man, Roscoe Conkling, who was a Republican, and the other paper did not have nice things to say about good old Horatio Seymour behind me. So, this has been going on. This has been going on for years, and what's happening now, with some of the reporting, CNN, Fox News, and stuff, the New York Times. I hear a lot of complaints about the biased reporting. But it's been going on for years. I guess it'll go on forever.
Well, I'm going to go down a road I shouldn't go down, and I know I shouldn't go down this road, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that is to recognize some people that are here today. And I want to recognize people who are at this table. Dave and I worked together for a lot of years. I never cared for editorial writers, you know, and Dave was an editorial writer. I said to Dave once, editorial writers are like somebody who sits on a mountain and watches the battle and then comes down and tells you what they did wrong. But Dave was a very community-oriented guy and supported this community in so many ways, and I missed his column once he stopped writing it, and I told him he made a mistake. I told him he made a mistake and he should have kept writing that column. And I watched Pam go literally from a secretary, right, Pam? A secretary, I don't know what her job title was. And I'm watching, my wife and I are watching this series, Suits. You ever see that, Suits? And there's this woman in Suits who I think of.
Oh, Meghan Markle?
No, the other one. Donna Paulson. And Donna Paulson came in as a secretary to Harvey. And now Donna is managing the firm. So, and I think of you, Pam, when I think of that. So. And when it comes to Frank, I've had a lot of bosses over the years, but never one as good as Frank. And he managed this way. And when I bought the Boonville Herald, I tried to manage this way, and I'm not sure I succeeded, but I tried to emulate Frank, and that was this. It was a big newsroom, and I was on one end and he was on the other end. And he would try to find something that I wrote that was good. And he would yell across the room, "Joe, great story on the press conference today." Of course, that's everybody between me and Frank are hearing that. And he had to look hard to find stuff, but he found it. And then when I wrote stuff that wasn't so good, which was a lot easier to find, he'd say, "Joe, I want to talk to you." He'd wait till your deadline pressure was off, take you in the back room, and say, "That story you did today, a lot of people in that room wouldn't have even got it in because there was no time. But you got it in the paper, so good. Now let me tell you what you could have done to made it a little bit better." And he would tell you. Now that's a good boss. Now here's where I'm going to go off the tracks a little bit here because I'm going to be forgetting somebody. But I want to recognize a few people. Shirley Williams is one, and she's sitting right over here in the front row. And Shirley knew what was going on in this town. I think she had a police scanner at her house. She knew what was going on. And she'd come in every day, and this is where she made Frank's job easy because she'd say, "Well, I'm going to write about this, this, and this." We have Mike here, who's up at the Sentinel. Not the wrong Sentinel, Frank. The Daily Sentinel. And he's a good journalist, and we're happy to have people like him in our community. You know, I see Carl Trainer over there. I got to recognize Carl. Carl would write from time to time. Carl's a funeral director, but he might have missed his calling. He's a good writer, and he would write about trains, which I love. Carl took me down to, he said, "You want to go on a road trip?" I said, "Yes." So this was several years ago. We went down on the train, which he loves as much as I do. We went down to a cemetery down in the Hudson Valley. This cemetery is the best named cemetery ever. The cemetery is called Gate of Heaven. John Dye is here today. John was city editor for many years at the OD.
Executive editor.
Executive editor, yeah. And did you start as city editor, John, and then got promoted, right? Yeah. And you know, for people not old enough to remember, you know, Utica had two of its own papers for a while, the Daily Press, where I started, and then I went to the OD, which was the night paper. One of the intriguing things to me is, and Frank and I have talked about this, is the Sentinel being an afternoon paper. Not only aren't there many family-owned independent newspapers, there's even fewer afternoon papers, but somehow the Sentinel makes it work. Well, the OD couldn't make it work, so what they did was they dropped the Daily Press, eliminated it, and then made the OD the morning paper, the paper of record. I see Bill Farrell here. Bill was the steadiest reporter I ever worked with. Nothing bothered Bill, and I kind of like that, you know, that he was just steady and honest and just a great guy to work with. And next to him is Pat Corbett, who is the romancer to Bill Farrell.
Boo.
And I'm looking, Barry Damsky is here. Barry wrote a column for the Herald for a lot of years and even got a book out of it. Very talented writer. And Nancy Ford is here. And Nancy was chief photographer for a while. The OD had a lot of great photographers go through those doors. Leo Holbeika was one that comes to my mind. And Leo, I fought this. They wanted reporters to start carrying cameras. Well, I was so against that, but it was a money-saving thing. And I said to Leo, I said, Leo, I don't even know how to take a picture. He gave me a 35 millimeter camera and he filled my pockets with they rolled their own film. So he said, film is cheap. He said, when you get to the job, just keep shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting. One of them's gonna come out. And it was good advice. And I don't know, I said I shouldn't have gone down this road and I hope I haven't missed anybody, but this area, Utica, Rome, has been blessed with some great journalists over the years. We've mentioned a lot of them here today, and I'm glad we did because I hate to see people like Gil Smith and Tony Vella and the Waters family. I hate to see them forgotten by the new generation because these people, Mason Taylor, another, we didn't mention Mason's name today, but people that won a Pulitzer Prize, I mean, just incredible talent.
Just before, you reminded me of something. We had a police reporter, Ed Ruffing. Ed Ruffing was police reporter for 25 years. And I'll never forget this. He had a police radio on his desk. The day he retired, 4 o'clock in the afternoon that was it. He was going to retire. About 20 minutes before, over the police radio came a report that there was an accident. He ran out of that building to get that story. 20 minutes before he was ready to retire. I mean, you don't get people like that anymore. You don't forget things like that. And just one more thing, you know, one of the reasons the papers merged, again, at the OD, they found afternoon papers weren't working. I know it works in Rome, but now my sister gets the Rome paper and the OD. Well, the OD comes by mail now, and she gets it, and the mailman delivers it at 5 o'clock. So the OD has become an afternoon paper again. So, that's it.
Okay, well, I guess Frank gets the last word. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today.